Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session, which is going to be Advocates Sharing Supportive Strategies. My name is Professor Matta Haggis-Burridge, and I'm a professor from Breda University of Applied Sciences. And I also run a narrative design and writing for games consultancy called Copperstone C. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to myself, then we're going to be going around the other panelists here, and we're going to be having a chat for the next 45 minutes or so, talking about experiences we've had trying to be advocates, some of the things that have gone right, some of the things that worried us along the way, and hopefully some of the things that we can think about recommending for the future that we hope to do in our own practice of advocacy, and hopefully we might suggest that you pick up as well. So I'll go and tell you a little bit about myself first. I've been a game developer for 20 years now. I started off as an indie developer around about 2000 using a fantastic piece of software called Flash, which I loved to bits, and I greatly mourned the loss of last year when that ended. It was a really great piece of software which allowed really great access from lots and lots of people to be able to dive in, make games, learn a bit of coding all along the way, and that was where I got my feet wet, basically learning how to do this. I was doing a PhD at the same time, so yeah, it kept me busy. Around 2007, I moved across to Electronic Arts, where I worked on Burnout Paradise. After that, I then went on to Rebellion, where I became a lead campaign designer for Aliens vs. Predator and a writer on that game as well. One of the things I was doing on that game was also trying to promote better representation. So this was probably the start of my kind of in-game advocacy, I would say, in that one of the things I remember being in the studio and saying, could we have a woman as the lead character? And unlike Ubisoft, where you wonder whether they could do different rigs for different characters, in Rebellion they actually genuinely did have different rigs for different characters and we couldn't swap it. So could we at least have not a white person as our lead character? And they were like, yeah, we haven't done that. Why haven't we done this before? And that's one of the things I keep on coming back to whenever I talk about advocacy, and particularly when I talk to AAA. A lot of people just hadn't thought about it. And there's a lot of practices they've got embedded in their heads. So some of it is just about being that person in the room, challenging them, and looking like I do, which is white and male presenting. And there's a lot of power in that. And that privilege and that power comes with great responsibility, as Spider-Man has taught us. So about 11 years ago, after working at Rebellion for a little while, I then came across to Breda University of Applied Sciences, where I became a lecturer in game design and production. About 5 or 6 years ago, I moved across into a research post. So you may have seen me mentioning on some of the early chats about European policy towards funding and research and gender. That's one of the things I do in my job, is to try and make sure that policy is going in a better direction and hopefully shaping things so that you folks out there can get funding to make your awesome games, and that we can have your bosses and your institutions around you doing good things. So that's a little bit about what I do. I'm going to be passing this around. I'm going to go clockwise on my screen. Actually, no, we're going to go from left to right on the screen over there. So, Stefan, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Matta. So my name's Stefan Cotechini, and I'm the founder of a game studio in Vancouver, Canada called 81 Monkeys. I first started my career about 15 years ago in the game industry. Before that, I was an entrepreneur. And as well as working in games, I also worked for an organization called the Gender Intelligence Group. And I've been doing that for about 10 years as a senior associate, which has me facilitating workshops and delivering keynotes on the data and science of differences. So mostly that means I work with corporations, Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and universities, speaking on the value of differences. And my commitment over the last few years has been to bring this to the game industry, speak at events like this, and really be an advocate for people to be their authentic selves at work. It happens to be that we focus on it from a gender lens, but it really, quickly transcends that. And the gender portion is really a bridge to the broader conversation on diversity. I think one of the things we found is focusing on gender and what we, as individuals think of as gender traits is actually a really easy place to start, because we're familiar with those, those traits, those tendencies, and sometimes those stereotypes. And so it makes it, easy to talk about it. And then there's a lot of data and science around that. So when you start to talk about the data and science, again, strictly from a value standpoint of how do differences bring value to, teams and performance, it's like opening a door, and through that, there's a much broader conversation. And in that work, because it is a conversation about gender, people often just think it's, women, and that gender intelligence group is there to speak for women. But, as a male, I'm really here to speak for men and for myself and my own experience, and be really mindful of the sort of space that I create for, difference thinking and different experiences, whether that's from women or from other diverse backgrounds. So I'm really happy to be here on this panel, and so thank you, Meta.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think something we can come back to in a moment is about the role of men within this. Obviously, we've got ideas about toxic masculinity and what masculinity can be, and how shaping that affects the lives of the people around us. And I think also collecting data was something that was mentioned earlier today. Steph, I think, was saying that access to data and statistics to really back up arguments and discussions of this is hard to come by. So I think some of the work you're doing there can also complement that. So let's come back to that in a little while. Joe is next up on the list over here. Hello, Joe. Can you tell us about yourself, please?
Very good morning from the dark and stormy Vancouver this morning, where Stefan and I are located. Thank you for the invitation for this as well. So my name is Joe Nichols. I am the president of Timber Games in Vancouver, and that is a part of the Sumo group, which a lot of people in Europe would be well familiar with. And I've been doing this for about 23 years. And I come from absolute, stereotypical white privilege, 6'5" male with a beard. I mean, come on. But I've been making games for a very long time, and I've been very fortunate in my career to be surrounded by amazing people to make games alongside of. Most recently, I was at Maxis, and for the past 4 years, I was the vice president and general manager of Maxis in California, overseeing The Sims. And boy, you can't find a more diverse product and a more diverse team than the group that makes The Sims. I was asked when I was at EA to become what we call an ambassador for the women's ultimate team, and not really knowing what that was, I kind of dug in a little bit and realized it was just doing a little bit of what I'm attempting to do in my career now, and be an ambassador and be an ally for diversity. And so I spent some time with the women's ultimate team at EA. And boy, did that ever really open my eyes even more than I thought I had. That's, I think, one of the problems most men encounter, that we think we're pretty aware of what's going on, and boy, are we ever not aware of what's really going on. So when we started to put together Timber Games, we wanted to have very distinct policies and very distinct culture around what we deem as acceptable and what we strive for in terms of diversity and inclusion. And a big part of that is having women in the studio as core driving forces, and not just the kind of token roles that people would always say, oh yeah, my person in HR is here, or what have you. Really finding really strong female leadership, and I'm so lucky to have found that with the partners that I have at Timber Games. And like I mentioned before, we are a new studio. We're just starting up. We've been going for a couple of months now, but we're pretty pleased with so far with the response. We are 60% women right now in a video game studio, which is like, hello, and a AAA video game studio as well. Not something that's just focused on niche. So we're quite pleased with that, but boy, do we have a long way to go. And one of the mottos that we've been using at our studio is culture drives creative. And I think this is really important, because the culture of your team drives the quality and the diversity of your products. So it's not just ticking a box. It's not just being, hey, look at us, where it's 2021. It's actually going to make better products that speak to more people and a better work environment for everybody. So, like I mentioned before, I'm very excited to be here along with my colleagues on the panel here, and I will now throw back to you, Matt.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Cool. So the last person up on this is Fernando. Fernando, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it's such a pleasure to share this panel with this incredible group who's been doing change and creating change and impacts in their own fields. We were talking earlier just how hard it is for each one of us, as males, trying to promote something as important as gender equality by our own is always hard. So I'm really happy to be able to share this with a group of guys who are actually doing really great stuff as well in this field. So for me, my background is more related to esports, not so much in the gaming studios as the other guys. I've been involved in esports for almost 20 years now. We started a non-profit organization based in Portugal called Grow Up Esports back in 2002. And since then, we've grown the organization in all aspects from a community perspective, where we first started as a group of friends who back in the day were playing in real tournament, and then it's just started growing from there. Their sisters joined, girlfriends joined, so it became a diverse organization by itself. Even competing teams at that time participating in LAN parties across Europe. It was really great because we had mixed teams. I competed in a mixed team as well for Call of Duty. So it was just a ground up community being built. So we always had a lot of exposure to what happens in the women's world, like how the harassment happens online, like everything, a lot of the things that were spoken in panels earlier to ours. So back in 2017, we gathered a group and we decided that we wanted to create change. So we created this event called the Girl Gamer Esports Festival, which is all about creating a safe environment for women to compete, to give more exposure opportunities, to bring more women-related brands to the gaming segment as well, and give support to these communities who are doing amazing things, because we believe that there should be more diversity in gaming in general. It's really hard for us to see that half of the gamers are women, but when you look at the esports stages, the big competitions that happen these days, women have 0 to 1% of participation in those. So there's got to be something wrong, because esports and playing video games is not something that involves a physical difference or like other sports. So we believe that there's fundamental differences that happen in the way that the players themselves are developing. So we want to try and figure out what are those reasons and create this whole event surrounding this whole concept to try and give more opportunities in terms of the competing space, to try and increase the player base as well, because the gaming space is male dominated, and one of the things that we always see is that the video game studios, most of them are still male dominated to this day. So the games themselves, when they come out, are also very male driven. So we want to try to inspire more girls to enjoy video games, to compete at video games, and hopefully they will study science and game development and all, and take leadership roles in those companies to develop games that are much more neutrally driven. So this is a bit of the work that we've been doing.
Awesome, thank you. I think something that is interesting is kind of an overlap of a lot of what we're doing here is looking at how we try to change or how we respond to organizational shifts. So Stefan, obviously you've worked at kind of almost consultancy and bringing data to companies to show how this works. Joe, you've been structuring a whole organization where you go, you're included and welcome, and we want to not just to hire women, but have staff retention here and growth direction for them. And obviously, Fernando, you've been organizing something which is quite different to the internal structures that are very male-dominated in esports. Does one of you want to jump in and kind of talk a little bit about how people have responded to these kind of structural shifts you've got? Maybe Stefan, maybe you want to talk, because you've done some consultancy with companies and presenting data through the gender equity stuff.
Yeah, I think in terms of shifting some of those structures. The work that we do at Gender Intelligence Group is really around sharing knowledge. A lot of companies reach out to us and they always ask, what tools and strategies are you going to bring? And that's what they want. They want to jump right into implementation. And we are like, we're not going to do that. Yeah, we know the tools and strategies, but what we're going to come and do is we're going to share the knowledge in such a way that your team members are going to see the value in this conversation. They're going to see the value in those initiatives. They're going to understand it for themselves, why they should care about it. Because at the end of the day, not everyone cares about reducing harm for others, unfortunately. I really care about that, right? I know when I speak in front of a room of people, not everyone's going to care enough about reducing harm for others that they're willing to invest resources and time into it. When you come at the conversation from a value standpoint, this is a difference it's going to make for your team, for your company, for your performance. It's a much more inclusive conversation, because when you're talking about bringing value to an organization or a team, that's much easier for people to understand. Okay, I know why I need to spend time and resources on this initiative. So that's really kind of the focus of what I do when I go to an organization. And the end result is, at the end of a day workshop or a 2-day workshop that I might do, at an organization, it's the team that come up with the tools and strategies as a result of really digging into the data, the science, and again, that value conversation. So, for me, that's really important. And I really try to bring this up. Any opportunity I have it's a challenge, because I think a lot of activists and allies, the reason why they're involved is because they see the harm that it does. They see the burnout in women, for instance, or they see the people being spoken over in not having their voices heard. They see those situations, they have empathy, they experience it with it, and then that becomes the thing that drives them to, attempt to make a difference. So, it's like, you don't want to diminish that, because that's hugely important. But shifting the conversation to why, why this makes a difference for all of us as individuals is really empowering. So.
To say it's viewpoints, it's experiences that people have that they bring to the table. When you're making games as long as I have, you've seen shifts of how we all started, and it was totally just a bunch of dudes working on video games, and it's like, I can't believe I got this job, and then we've seen not only the audience diversify, but the platforms in which we make these products diversify as well. And I think it's really important that you don't just go and pick out all your friends and pick out all the people that you're comfortable with to make products. You have to actually, I'm equally as excited to meet the new people that I don't know to help make some of the products as I am with the people that I already know. And there's a kind of a magic in that, because if you surround yourself with all the people that that you've worked with in the past, you know exactly what you're going to get. Right? But where you're missing that magic is you bring a whole bunch of people in that you don't know, that bring different experiences and different approaches and viewpoints of how we make products. And it just makes it better. It just makes everything better. People bring up things that, oh, wow, I haven't heard about them, thought about doing something like that. I mean, how many times have we all been in a meeting where it's like, oh, I haven't thought about doing something like that before? It's like, well, of course you haven't thought about doing something like that before, because you surround yourself with the same people you've been working with forever. It's when the call came out and asked if there would be an appetite to do something like this, the first thing that I thought about was, and I know that you thought about this the same way. It's like, all male panel. I'm like, oh, really? How's that going to go? I'm thankful for people that are watching, but understand that even a panel like this, I'm no longer completely comfortable unless I have way more viewpoints. So I guess what I'm trying to kind of really say is that it really has impacted our studio in such a positive way, from everything from better ideas, better approaches, interesting viewpoints, but it's actually turned out to be an amazing recruiting tool for us without actually trying to make it a recruiting tool. We're starting to build a reputation of this is what we stand for. And a lot of people are calling us, and even if they will never work with us, they want to talk about what we're doing, and we want to learn from them. But it really comes down to bringing an incredibly diverse crowd together, and then just shutting up, listening to people instead of being the person that always has to talk in the room, which I have been guilty of for a long time. So just get back and listen.
I think that's awesome. Stefania, is that something you wanted to add there?
I wanted to add something that just to really kind of validate what Joe was sharing. One of the studies that I often cite, actually 2 studies from Harvard and MIT, where they took groups of students, and some people, listening to this may have heard of these studies, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go look them up. They're online. Harvard and MIT, they both took groups of students, and they put them into individual groups, and then the researchers attempted to predict their how they would succeed at various tasks. So these are very technical challenges, and so they would attempt to predict what teams would surpass other teams. And so they looked at the data they had. They had things like average GPA. They had IQ scores on the individual team members. It makes sense to look at those things and say, hey, if this team is, they perform really well in school, we put them together, they're going to perform good as, they should perform well as a team. And they looked at a bunch of other things, but they also looked at gender and gender balance on the teams. And what they found was that there was no better predictor for success in all the challenges they gave than gender balance. The closer the teams got to 50-50, the better they performed. The further they went one way or the other, the performance would drop off. And this really was a big kind of aha for them at that moment in time. And what they sort of, just to go back to Joe's point, what they realized was that so many companies and teams focus on individual intelligence. They want you've heard the best and the brightest, right? And they're like, that's the wrong thing to focus on. What we need to focus on is cultural intelligence. And that's not an individual thing. Cultural intelligence is a group thing. It's a team thing, and it's the makeup of that group that really accelerates things and makes a difference. So I just felt that was a good time to share that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah. So Fernando, we talked about a little bit about some of the ideas of how to push things forwards, talking about some of the data behind it. Now you've obviously done something which is somewhat unusual of esports for women league. And I'm sure there's been a lot of opposition along the way from that. How have you kind of overcome that, or how have you experienced that? How have you managed to kind of get to the place you've managed to do this? How have you brought this into life?
Yeah, it is definitely not easy, and there's always 2 sides to the story, right? So from one perspective, there are people who disagree with the segregation of genders, because at the end of the day, like I was saying earlier, there's no reason for such a division to exist, right? Everyone should be competing at the same level, with the same opportunities, with the same kind of exposure, and with the same kind of support. But that's just not happening. So I think that it's important to take a step back and try to understand the reasons for why this is not happening. Some of them were definitely talked about in panels earlier, the toxicity that happens, the demotivation that it creates in the players, and all of those negative things that just contribute to a loss of interest from players who really want to be focused on this. So we do see this kind of segregated events as a stepping stone, as something that we can help to increase, for example, the player base. Like it's important to create these initiatives because many women don't feel comfortable in competing in environments where they don't feel welcome. So if you create something that is only for women and they can have a space where, they feel comfortable in doing, it's a safe environment, there's no toxicity happening, we can inspire them to compete further and to further develop their skills. Hopefully our idea is to help increase this player base because, when we look at players competing, if we say that when 1% are the professional players, then definitely if we talk about if we compare the player base between genders, like male players and female players. Obviously, male players has a much larger player base. So 1% of that are the ones that are going to be, dominating all those Intel Extreme Masters and major tournaments and all of those. So we want to try and inspire, develop the grassroots to inspire these girls to develop even further and start competing, because ultimately that's what's going to increase the number of girls competing. So 1% of those are going to be much more than they are right now. So I think that this will help them to enable to reach a higher step in a competing level. So one of the objectives is definitely this. We don't see this as something that should be going on forever, but we see it as a stepping stone towards more inclusive tournaments and basically creating more diversity, having more participation. And we don't really think that it has to be 50%, there can be other interests. But when you look at the current demographics and you see less than 1% of women competing in those major stages, it causes a bit of confusion, and I think people really try to wonder why. Is it girls don't play games? Is it the case in 2021? I don't think it is the case, right? So there's a lot of different motivations behind the lack of participation. We tried to explore this in 3 small documentaries that we released, and it's available to watch on YouTube. There's so many reasons for this to happen that it just becomes much more difficult for women to reach that space. So we want to try and be the event that creates change and helps to include them in those competitions.
I think something that's really interesting there is that you're obviously doing a good job at managing to create a safer space, a place for us. One of the things I think all of us would like to do is that we create something safe as a starting point and then begin to stretch that safety out into other studio cultures. So something that I had for my kind of personal practice was I made an indie game between 2013, 2016, 2017, a game called Fragments of Him, which was about a bisexual man who dies in an accident. His partner at the time, how his partner comes to terms with that loss, and how his friends and family come to terms with that loss as well. And so I did a lot of work on trying to write, well, that was a game which had 50% women as main characters within that. You had an older woman as well. Age diversity is incredibly important as well, something very much overlooked within video game content. It's always people who are 20, 30s protagonists most of the time. Love to see Returnal, and you've got a kind of middle-aged woman as a lead character. It's hell yeah. So rare to see a person's face with wrinkles in a video game. But one of the things I found really interesting was that now I'd developed kind of my own kind of writer's voice, my own creative voice, my own confidence in writing about kind of LGBTQ ideas, driving from my own experience of being a bisexual growing up in the 90s, and kind of coming out experiences and the conversations that I'd had, and managed to channel that creatively into a video game which was written about by people all over the world and had loads of players. After I'd made Fragments of Him, when I was doing consultancy with other companies, I felt a lot more confident in being able to say to them, well, yeah, you could have that woman doing that thing, and you could have that man doing that thing, but we could have a non-binary person over here. We could have a gender swap on those roles. We could think of diversifying the character sets that we're playing with here. We can think about the emotional ranges which are available to your male characters and to your female characters. And usually when I've said this to people, they're like, oh my God, I hadn't really thought about working it that way before. It's to them, it looks like I've got some sort of creative genius thing going on, but to me, it's just stop thinking of gender boundaries as so rough, defining little things. And so by managing to have that little safe space where I did my own professional practice with a couple of developers who I very much trust, I gained the confidence to speak more meaningfully to AAA companies that I now work with. And I've now worked on a few different titles that people may have heard of, and things like Dying Light 2 is coming out later this year. I was one of the writers on that. So trying to bring kind of this same ethics of inclusion into the AAA industry. And I've found that AAA is very receptive to this. often they're just not quite sure how to begin. So I think something that's very important is sharing the lessons that we get from this. Fernando, I'm going to come back to you again, but sort of how would you hope that the lessons from what you've done creating a women's league, how would you hope that those lessons inspire the other leagues? Because the other leagues are usually mixed gender as well. They're not exclusively male leagues, but they just end up that way because of kind of toxic atmosphere in the locations and in the competitions. How would you say that you're going to inspire others, or do you think that's possible at the moment?
Yes, like you were saying, the other leagues is not that they are like only for men. They are actually open for anyone to compete. But the problem still is it doesn't happen at high level. The problem happens at grassroots, right? So if the development of those teams is not happening at grassroots, then they can never reach the higher level that is required to compete in those competitions. And I think the issue here is really about unlocking that potential in the grassroots level. Definitely, like you were asking if how are we inspiring those leagues? I don't think that there's a way to inspire those leagues, because those leagues really just want to have the best players. It's not really their fault, if we can put it that way, that they don't have women competing. It's just the whole ecosystem itself that has a problem. You know, the organizations themselves. Mm-hmm. When I talk to like big organization CEOs, and they tell me that they don't care, like they don't care about the gender of the player. They just want the best players. Okay, I understand. They want the best players, and they don't care about genders. But if they don't give an extra importance to a gender that is, you know, being suppressed right now in the whole ecosystem, then how can ever this gender can develop into becoming like a high-level competing person or player to be able to participate in those so-called main teams. So I think that everyone in the ecosystem needs to support it. And especially one of the reasons that like myself and my colleagues who are men are so passionate about pushing this forward is because we are in a male-driven and male-dominated industry still, just like engineering, just like a lot of other different industries. So I think that we are the ones that really need to inspire more advocates to take action and not just stand by. You know, it's very easy to say I want the best players. I don't care about their gender, but if you're not really doing anything about it, same as the people who disagree with having segregated genders tournaments, like they say, oh, the tournament should not be separated. Everyone should be competing together. Well, that's not happening. And if people are just saying that and not taking any sort of action, it's never going to happen. So I think that it's important to create more initiatives and inspire maybe not those tournaments themselves to do something, but the people behind it to take some sort of action into being more inclusive.
Yeah, and I think that's a key factor there, taking action to be more inclusive. I think there's a George Day he's a black rights kind of scholar. And he said, inclusion isn't about bringing people into your space, it's about creating space for them. And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it, going, okay, we may have a toxic masculine space. How do we create a space which is of equal worth, of equal value, of equal prestige, which is actually inclusive and welcoming and supportive and allows growth and celebrity and success and all the other things that esports may have in there. Stefan, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I think really great, Fernando, the work that you're doing and the commitment that you have. You know, I think just considering my own experience and how that could apply to what you're up to, you know, I taught briefly at a college here in British Columbia, and you know, I did it on the side. I just thought it was a good opportunity for me to, you know, put myself out there and sort of develop my own leadership. So I started teaching in the game design development program. And what I discovered was that the school that I was at had about a 15 to 20% enrollment rate of females and a 50% dropout rate of the females. And I just was like, this is so wrong. And all male instructors. And so I went to the school, to the dean, and I went to the head of the department, and I said, we really need to address this. And I attempted to frame it as a business thing. You guys are going to be better off. There's going to be more enrollment if you focus on women. And the way that you do that is you get some female instructors in here. And I just so happened to have a really great one. And I brought her in so that my goal was like, if there's some, great female leaders here at the school, the females who are enrolling are going to get to, see themselves in that person and have a better connection and better mentorship and a better opportunity as a result of that. And so they put my candidate through the interview process, and she was up against a couple males, and they did like a 10-minute teach. So it's like a test teach. So you have 10 minutes, you have to teach a topic. And they came out of it and they were like, okay, so, we're hiring this gentleman. You should have seen him. He was so amazing. He just nailed the 10-minute teach, and she was really good. Your candidate was really good, Stefan. I think if she had 4 hours, she would have been amazing. But she didn't quite do it. And I said, aren't classes 4 hours? And then I said, also, have you considered her approach to teaching? Because she's told me her approach. Her approach is that she doesn't want to be in front of the class lecturing. She wants to be sitting down with the individual students, supporting them one-on-one. That's her commitment. And I'm like, that's the commitment that's currently missing, because you have a bunch of guys that are coming, speaking at students, and then that's it. And it was like a deal breaker for me, because they weren't willing to budge. They just weren't willing to consider that there is an opportunity in having different teaching styles. And so I actually resigned and I left that school. But Fernando, going back to your point, is having those females who are in your leagues and finding opportunities to get them exposure to other females so that they can see them playing. And I really think that could be really empowering and important, because when we look at esports, we see all men. And so when young girls are looking at esports, they're seeing all men, and that's just a barrier to seeing themselves in those places. So, I mean, this is definitely across all the game industry, and it's stuff that Matt was talking about. And so I think that's really important, is that we're those women who are comfortable doing so, that we help prop them up and we help get them exposure so that those others see themselves in it.
Yeah,
role models, right?
Yeah,
at the end
role models,
of the day.
100%. Yeah,
definitely. I want to jump on to Joe. We've got about 7 minutes left or so of this panel here. Joe, if you were to kind of say what's best practice, if another company wants to end up with 60% women as a staff, or 50% women as a staff, or 48, and 2% non-binary people as a staff, how would you say they should go about doing this from your own experience? What led you to create a culture which was more supportive and more inclusive?
I would say lead with your values. Most video game studios are kind of all the same. They just kind of do the same thing. They make a game, they put it out, they pat themselves in the back, they put them, they post on Facebook and LinkedIn and everything. Look at us, look at us, look at us. And it's almost always about look how successful we are, look at our amazing game. You do need to be able to push your product. But one of the tools that we've tried to do is to try to lead a little bit more with our values and what we believe in, and lead with our culture. And we think we have invented a new term because there's blogs and vlogs. Well, we have a kind of a weekly comic that we put out, and wait for it, we call it a clog. And it's not just about the games that we have coming out or the things that we're working on. It's actually, we try to highlight how we work together as a team. And it's this goofy comic that we put out. We're very, very lucky. We have a guy named Jeff Coates, and he's an amazing artist. He is the studio creative director. And the other co-founder of our studio is Zoe, who's head of production. The three of us really sat down and decided how we wanted to portray the studio publicly. And one of the vehicles that we had is Jeff has made a history of drawing me doing really stupid stuff all the time. And it was funny, back when I was at Capcom running that studio in Vancouver, and it's evolved into be kind of almost our visual resume of the kind of people that we are and the kind of people we want to work with. And so what we've been doing, sometimes we'll talk about something stupid like me being the part-time IT guy as we start setting up, and I'm doing things I am punching way above my weight class I should not be doing, and we have some fun with that. But then we talk about some harder issues. And what I have found is that people really resonate with that. They go, wow, here's a studio that's kind of leading with what their vision and values are. And that is what has got most attention. People calling us, wanting to find out about us. Not about us posting a job, or not about us saying, hey, we're looking for a rendering engineer, or looking for a narrative designer. It's much more about, who is your studio? And why would I want to work for you? Because Vancouver, in case you haven't checked, has got about 1,000 video game studios. So what makes you the studio that you want people to come and work for? And it really comes down to, am I going to enjoy the work? Will I be respected and welcomed? Will I be able to do my best work? And can I do it without just having a spotlight shone on me and say, hey, look, look at us supporting a gender or a diverse candidate, without making it a thing? And I'll end it with, we're in the middle of a federal election in Canada right now. But about 4 years ago, when now Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he had a cabinet, and he introduced his cabinet. The cabinet was really, really diverse. And whether or not you support that party or not, it doesn't really matter. But he said something really profound. He said, someone said, hey, why do you have all this, in your cabinet? Because there was, half women in his cabinet. He just looked at the camera and goes, because it's 2017. Next question. Didn't make anything, moved on. That's kind of how we've been thinking about our studio.
Yeah, and I think I give a lot of talks about feminism to my game development students and intersectional awareness. And also, I think it's really important to acknowledge how, when you talk about supporting women and all genders, you are talking about also LGBTQ rights. You're talking about racial justice. You're talking about class justice. You're talking about ableism and neurodiversity. And you're talking about all these different things. And you have to start realizing that the world is not run well. The world should not only be cisgender white men, right. And then trying to find ways to be inclusive across all of that. Because if you're kind of going, we're the best for women, and you're terrible at everything else, then it still doesn't matter. We've got to be better. We've got to be better. We've got the responsibility. We've often got a lot of power, and we are the ones who can shape what tomorrow is going to look like. And I'm hoping that with the support of people like us, we can put other people forward, the people watching this thing right now, the people out there, all you folks out in TV, internet land. Hopefully we can give you a platform to stand on, and we can support you when you need to be supported. And hopefully we can get the fuck out of the way when you don't need us there. And I think all of us have had that experience when we should just shut up and stop talking and hand the stage over to somebody else. So I think that finding the right time to do that is something which is crucial for all of us as well, which is why it's so weird to do an all-male panel, particularly at Women in Games conference. But I hope this has been very interesting for all of you folks. Are there any last words? Like, we've got about 3 minutes maximum here. Is there anything that people want to just jump in with, or shall we start to wrap up? We've got one coming from Joe there.
I think it's really important to say that guys are not always going to get it right, but it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask, right? Because a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't want to ask anything because I don't want to look like an idiot or whatever." No, look like an idiot, because you probably are being an idiot if you think you're looking like an idiot. So stop being an idiot. Be okay to ask, and then in return, please tell men what we are doing wrong, because eventually it'll sink in. Eventually we will get the message as a group instead of just, puffing out our chest.
Yeah, I mean, all of us, I think we've all on this call tried our best to learn. I've learned so much just by reading and watching lots of people's posts and just going out, what on earth does that term mean? And just going out, finding out more and more and more. Even with the best education I've tried to give myself and the best I've tried to frame this for other people in the education I give, we're still going to make mistakes. We're going to try our very best to own those mistakes and do better in the future. But women could be sexist. Gay people could be homophobic. We're all going to try our best, though, to be good people. We've had both Fernando and Stefan. You've got like 20 seconds each.
Really quickly.
Fernando, you'll go first. Yeah.
Sure. Just really quick. I think it's really important for us to have this kind of space to talk as men, because at the end of the day, men are also the one gender that is creating the most toxicity for women online. So it's really important for us to be advocates in this, and to maybe inspire other men that it's okay to promote gender equality, to step in and stop the harassment when they see it happening online. Players should all do this. Everyone in the industry should support more women women who are being suppressed. So definitely very, very great to have you guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. You've got about 10 seconds.
That was really well said. And I'm going to go along with that and say that for women's groups out there like Women in Games, I think it's really important that you involve men, invite them out, really support those allies. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming to our session, and we hope that you stay tuned for all the talks coming up next. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for Women in Games for letting us be here. Thank you for everybody organising behind the scenes. Hope you enjoy the rest of the days. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.